Hello, and welcome back to the Green Standard podcast powered by Veriheal, where we talk about all things cannabis. And today we are talking to Judson Hill, who is not only the president of the Georgia branch of Fettle dispensaries, but is a very experienced cannabis professional with over 10 years in the industry. We cover a lot of topics. He brought a lot of great insights into this conversation. But before we get into it, if you are interested in getting your medical card, if you are wondering if you qualify in your state, Veriheal can help you get answers to all your questions and hook you up with a certified cannabis practitioner in your area who truly cares about your health and wellness journey. So to get started, visit veriheal.com. That's Veriheal.com, and we'll see you there. Let's get into it. Well, thank you, Judson, for coming on the Green Standard podcast. There will be like a more biographical article accompanying this episode, but for those of us who don't know you, can you introduce yourself a little?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Judson Hill. I'm the president of Fettle here in Georgia. Been in the cannabis industry for about a decade, mostly in California is where I originally got started. I used to live in LA, started working across the country as cannabis spread, and now I'm happy to be home in my hometown of Atlanta at the ground level of Georgia Cannabis.
Sweet. Yes. And we will get into the Georgia scene. We'll get into Fettle a little later. But I do kind of want to dig into your personal experience for a sec. Something that you told me during our first conversation is that you were part of a team that I guess founded like the first cannabis loan institution in California. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that looked like?
Yes, I can. The company was called Bespoke Financial. We were one of the first lenders specifically working with cannabis companies. And I guess what it looked like and how I got involved is my background isn't in finance. I was actually in fashion before cannabis. And then when I got in cannabis, I was on the brand side where I helped start a brand in the medical market. And I guess I just say that because one of the issues, especially in California, but across the industry in cannabis, is people don't always pay their bills on time, or even when they do, it takes a long time for cash to flow through the supply chain. So what becomes most difficult for cannabis companies, especially, let's say you're trying to sell into a dispensary, but you also need to go out and produce more product to be able to have new product to put on shelves. It often becomes this cash flow issue. So we were doing inventory financing and factoring, which I understood because that's common in fashion, or basically you get an order from, let's say, a large department store, then you get financing to go out and make that shirt or make those shoes or whatever it is. And it's similar to cannabis, where let's say you're making pre-rolls, you're making vape carts, you need to buy the cannabis ingredient that goes into that product. You also need to buy the packaging, and that costs money. So we would offer people loans to produce their products and then repay us on interest terms as they got paid back from the dispensaries.
Yeah, sweet. So, like, I guess what I'm wondering, because like banking, first of all, I don't really know anything about it in the first place, but like cannabis banking is like historically cloudy. Like, it's very hard for cannabis businesses to like get loans. So, like, when you were starting this institution or on the team of people who started it, like, what kind of obstacles did you face? Walk me through that process if you don't mind.
Yes, happy to. Well, I don't know if we have enough time to go through all the obstacles, but the main ones, I mean, I was the second member of the company, so we'd gotten set up. Our founders, come from Goldman Sachs and more of the traditional finance background, so they got the fundamentals of the business in place. And this was 2019, so this was whatever, 5 years ago at this point in time. Cannabis banking is still hard. 5 years ago, it was even more difficult. The main hurdles, I guess, were twofold. One, why I came on the team was trying to explain to cannabis operators, especially 5 years ago, and legacy California operators, how they could utilize debt financing, where it frankly seemed like, either a scary or a negative term of some type of loan shark looking to, do loans in the traditional market of cannabis. And then also on the other side, trying to explain to professional institutions like banks why they should work with us or bank us. So we were kind of in the middle where we were too cannabis-y for the banks and we were too banky for the cannabis folks.
Sure.
And that was kind of the crux of the issue. So most banks, um, at least in California, I mean, it's pretty normal to work with cannabis companies. And even us here in Georgia now, we have banks that work with us. So I guess not a misunderstanding, but a little more access to banking in the industry than some people lead on to believe. Uh,
Mhm.
the big groups like, Chase, JP Morgan, or Bank of America definitely don't work with cannabis, but the smaller local ones do. So we would partner with them, at least the banks that worked with cannabis companies, where we would offer the loans and they would just do more of the deposit accounts. Cause even if they were willing to bank the cannabis money, that was kind of risky enough for them. None of them were looking to actually loan money to cannabis companies. And that was kind of the partnership where we would find banks that were holding cannabis companies' money, but they didn't provide the loans, and we would provide the loans. And then my job was really to communicate to the cannabis operators that that was a normal thing done in any other industry, like I said, fashion, uh, and they should try it out rather than be skeptical.
Right. Yes. And like, give me some insight into like the culture in 2019 back then. Like, were cannabis businesses like accustomed to working with like even local banks?
Um, no, I guess that was another hard part for me at first, where maybe I was a little naive, but when I was signing up for the job, I was like, "Oh, this is easy. I know a ton of people in the industry. Everyone would love money.
Mhm.
Well, it'd be hard to find clients." I guess what was difficult was we required our clients to have a bank account, and 5 years ago, not all of them did, or to the point of, sometimes it would just be like the owner had a bank account in their personal name that they would put money in, but that's not really how you run a business, to just have a personal account. Uh,
Mhm.
so yeah, it was more kind of a long sales cycle of getting people to get a bank account first. And again, that's what led us to just partner with the banks. Therefore, we got cannabis companies that already had a bank in place versus going the other route. So that was kind of one side of it. And then, yeah, I mean, we were the first to do this inventory financing. So it was very new and took a lot of explaining, which I think was kind of the nice part about our team, where we had a collective group from the finance industry. So there were people that understood the fundamentals and what we were doing. I'll be honest, that wasn't my role at first. I definitely learned it over time. But then there's people like me and other folks that came from the industry and had relationships, where I think, I mean, in cannabis or any industry, it's really about having trust and understanding of what's going on in the industry. And I had been working in cannabis for years prior to that. So fortunately, I had some relationships that were built on trust.
Right. Yes. And I feel like that's like a common thread throughout your experience that you shared with me in our first interview of like your connections kind of made space for like your next career moves, if you don't mind me making that assumption. Like moving from fashion to cannabis and then moving from California to Georgia, like it's kind of like Georgia's obviously your home, but do you know what I'm trying to say here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's well, hopefully not too novel of an idea, but yeah, if you're just honest with people and you keep things transparent and you keep an open mind, then I really just moved. I mean, the cannabis industry, especially, is very ever changing. So, yeah, to go from starting a pre roll company to lending money to cannabis, I worked at a software compliance company in the cannabis industry and now be an operator in a southern state. Those all might seem, I guess, different, but for me, it was really just kind of like looking where the puck was moving in the cannabis industry and staying aware of where the opportunities were and leveraging those relationships to make it happen.
Right. And like one last question about this, like since 2019 to now, how have you seen the like financial side of cannabis change or grow?
Um, that's a funny question. I would say the industry has obviously grown and it continues to grow at a rapid pace, which is awesome to be a part of. One of, if not the fastest growing industry in the world. I mean, in terms of jobs and just the international, I guess, revenue that is created at this point, I think cannabis is clearly here to stay. Why I hesitate is it's a lot tougher financially for cannabis companies now than, let's say, 2019. And that's because a lot of money was invested into the space early on, just frankly under hope and people thinking there was a get rich quick scheme, or people that, thought something would materialize quicker than it would or did. So yeah, I mean, it's really changed over the course of time where people actually spent a lot more money, had a lot bigger budgets out of the gate back then. And in some regards, it was more sophisticated, at least in California. Like, people would have sales teams all across the state and would have all these marketing budgets to do all these cool things. And then, not to be pessimistic, but all that really proved to not be worthwhile because unfortunately the cannabis consumer has not been very brand loyal yet. And frankly, the highest potency and the cheapest weed is what the data shows sells in most markets. So it's not mature enough to be like, a fashion brand that has, a dedicated following and people pay for luxury and people, you have a Supreme hat on, like, there is, you know, no real Supreme of weed. People might have tried that at this point in time. So, um, yeah, I think that's kind of been the big issue is the profit wasn't there that people hoped for, and therefore investment dollars have pulled out. So it's harder to get investors, and it's also hard to make money because it's a highly taxed industry since we're still federally illegal. To the lending point, even the people that lend money, it's very costly. It's high interest rates. So if you have, a 60% tax rate and a 20% interest rate, that's 80% right there of your money. Even if you're good at running your business, there's very little room for profit. So, long way of saying, I think the industry has proven difficult from a financial point of view, and that's become evident over the past 2 years.
Yes. And it's making me kind of like sympathize. Like, I always sympathize with like legacy cannabis businesses, but like it's making me kind of sympathize with them even further because, like, when you have a successful legacy cannabis business, like, what's the motivation to like move into a legal space if it's so hard to do so? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess that's why I'm sitting here in Atlanta, Georgia, not in Southern California anymore.
Fair. Yeah.
And yes, I know exactly what you mean. I love Georgia, and I mean, Georgia and places all over the country have their own rich history of cannabis. I would like to think, cannabis and hip hop and the culture in Atlanta has like been there for a long time. But California is frankly where cannabis culture started and at the heart of it in the US, in my opinion, and to the whole legacy operators and what have you. I mean, people were doing cannabis for, 50 plus years. It's been medical in California since the 90s. And then to your point, like when it went recreational, which passed in 2016 in California, went into effect in 2018, these people have been doing this for a long time in the medical market or whatever traditional market they were in, and were making money. So they had this whole dream of like making it legal, which I think is a funny word because frankly, nothing is legal. Everything is regulated. Like, you don't make milk or cereal at your house and then like go sell it on the street. Like everything's
Sure.
regulated industry. So, um, but anyways, people just had this like pie in the sky idea. It will go legal and then it will be great. And frankly, it's proven to be costly, and it's really sad because it's put a lot of these people out of business that were really like, you know, at the ground level and the forefathers essentially of the industry. So definitely sad to see.
Right. And I understand the skepticism for sure. But like, if we were to envision a future for cannabis banking, et cetera, what do you want? You know?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's the safe banking bill, which people have talked about for a handful of years now. It hasn't gotten passed at the legislative level. That would open up a lot of banking access. But to my earlier point, it's not that hard to find a bank right now for cannabis companies. So it's not really the biggest issue. What I think is much more important is the rescheduling process that's happening, moving cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, which is fortunately in process. Hopefully, based on the election results, will continue to happen. We'll see. With politics, don't really believe anything until it's actually done. But if cannabis was moved to Schedule 3, the biggest benefit from a business standpoint, I think, is the tax rate would change. So right now, because we're Schedule 1, that means it's the highest level. We're like on with par with heroin and what have you. So we get taxed very high because we can't write off our cost of goods and all these things. So if we move to Schedule 3, we could get taxed more in line to a traditional business where like a large corporation, they're trying to push their taxes like below 20%, working down to zero if you're one of the, big guys out there in the corporate world. And I think that's the most meaningful change. Like if you could start paying closer to 20 to 30% taxes versus 60%, that's 30% difference back into everyone's pocket overnight. That's so that's what I'm most excited about. And then the safe banking, secondly, it would be nice to, have more clarity from a legal standpoint around, banks being able to work with cannabis. And I think that would open up, more money coming into the industry and all the things. But at the simplest, you can get a bank account right now. It's not that difficult as a cannabis company.
Got you. Like, you might not know the answer to this question, but if it's rescheduled, does that mean I can use my debit card at the dispensary instead of going to the ATM every time?
Well, I guess I know a answer with the answer, but a answer is you could use a debit card right now, or even some dispensaries you could use a credit card. So I guess there's what happens in reality versus these laws, and that's kind of why, like something like paying taxes, you can't get around. So that's why it's very important to me. Like I said, there's banks that are available to cannabis companies, and there's also solutions in the terms of debit processors and credit processors for the industry. So I mean, if you work with most of the big POS systems, they have a debit card program. I mean, frankly, most of them it's like a reverse ATM or things of that nature. But if you ever gone to a dispensary and you put your card in and then they're like, well, we'll round it up and then we give you cash back. Like, not to get too much into the minutia or put people on blast, but that's how it works. But you would be able, I guess, in theory, to use debit and credit cards potentially more legitimately as it progresses, because that again is all tied to federal illegality that we're currently in, and that's why you can't use debit and credit as you would a normal store.
Yes, and maybe that was a silly question, but
No, it's not a silly question. I mean, all questions are good questions, and I guess it's every dispensary is different because some use these different workaround processes and some just say, hey, it's cash only and go to the ATM right there.
right, because like that's kind of
Not a blanket solution that all dispensaries use or even all states use. It's very mishmash, like the whole industry.
right. Because like that's kind of why I wanted to have this conversation today, because as I said, banking is confusing in general, but also it's like every dispensary you go to has a different way of collecting your money or whatever. And like if it's that confusing on the customer level, it's has to be confusing on the business level. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, yes, there's complex decisions. I mean, there's the cost of these solutions. I mean, it's not like they do card processing for free. So there's a charge involved. So does the customer want to pay that? Does the business pay that? To your point earlier, is any of this even legal? So there's, I guess, a regulatory point of view. Are you more risk adverse or risk on for your? So it's not as simple as it may seem. Do you want to take debit or credit or not?
Right. Yes. And until that rescheduling happens, which is hopefully in the very near future, I guess we'll keep on keeping on.
Yeah, just do what you do out there.
Yes. But before we transition into the fine fettle section of this conversation, I'd like to take a little break and ask you what's your hottest cannabis take?
Hottest cannabis take. Um, okay. Well, I think one of the hottest cannabis issues right now or conversations is the relationship between the regulated markets and the hemp industry seems to be what everyone likes to talk about. And I guess my hot take is I don't think that they should be competing with each other. I think I work a lot at the political and the lobbying level here in Georgia, but whether it's Georgia or the national level, I mean this is still an illegal drug, and if we don't have one consistent message and we aren't aligned within our own industry, they'll happily tune us out. So I would simply say if everyone in the industry on either side or both sides wants it to progress, then we should all get along. And then from a business point of view, I mean, I think it makes sense to be on both sides of the space. I mean, I believe that cannabis is medicine. I also believe people should have access to it recreationally. And if you could sell a hemp product in a gas station or a grocery store where people already go as a consumer and as a cannabis fan, I think that's awesome. So I'm not going to be mad that they could do that. I think you should try and figure out a way to get some exposure to it. And I think in the long run, I mean, every state is different in alcohol as well, but I kind of use the analogy of like in Georgia, at least, or in a lot of southern states, you can't sell liquor at a grocery store. So they have liquor stores where you go get the hard stuff and you can get, beer and wine at a grocery store or what have you. I see the future of the industry being like you could get flour and vape and concentrates and the more strong products at the licensed dispensaries, being the liquor store equivalent. And then you could get, more low dose products, beverages, low dose gummies, a topical with hemp Delta 9 in it, whatever it may be, in like traditional retail channels.
Interesting. That's a take that the hemp versus marijuana conversation is obviously a conversation that I have heard before, but I didn't really think about the parallel for like hard liquor, beer, grocery store versus liquor store kind of thing. And you know what? I think I'm on your side. I think that I would love to see those low dose things at King Supers or whatever, and then the dispensary is kind of the liquor store equivalent.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all in the industry here. I don't want to say the dispensaries go away, and there's clearly a purpose for them. And I mean, the good news if you're in the dispensary side of the business is flower and vape, and those SKUs are the top selling SKUs. So, you get the number one selling products. It's not like the business becomes irrelevant, but it just is a way to normalize and expand cannabis to people that might not be going to dispensaries yet. And I think that's a better way to look at it is like, especially to go back to talking about 2019 or the early days of cannabis, people had this whole idea like the soccer mom is going to come in and be the number one customer. And that didn't happen. What like the customer was, like I said, the low cost, high potency customer. But I think that's because as a generalization, whether it's a soccer mom or an elderly person or just your average person, they aren't going to the dispensary on a regular basis. And even, someone that may be in the industry like myself, I go to the grocery store, the convenience store more than a dispensary. If you can put cannabis in a place where people already go, then you're going to open up a whole new consumer base, which I think is beneficial to our industry rather than just assuming everyone is going to show up at a dispensary.
Right. And that kind of also speaks to your point of like working together because like if we are hypothetically on the same side of this fight, we want to combat the stigma against cannabis, we want to make it more easily accessible, then both sides of the coin, hemp, marijuana, should maybe be happy that the soccer mom is finding the edibles in the aisle, the pharmacy section of CVS or whatever. You know what I mean?
You nailed it. It's, about destigmatizing cannabis and accessibility. And if those aren't your goals, then I'd rather debate you than
Yeah.
it's cannabis. But I think the people that are in it for the right reasons understand that those two things are the top two priorities.
Right. And I kind of want to tug on this thread a little bit as far as like what dispensaries may look like when cannabis is Schedule 3, because I think another Schedule 3 drug is like anabolic steroids or something. So you'd
Correct.
still want the guidance of like a pharmacist. How might dispensaries kind of navigate that,
Yeah, you're correct. I mean, steroids, codeine, these are all, pretty common Schedule 3 drugs. So point being, doctors prescribe them, you get them in a pharmacy. They're not Schedule 1 like a heroin. It is unique. I mean, that question lends itself to Georgia and Fine Fettle specifically, because Fine Fettle originally started and is based out of Connecticut, where the market is very pharmaceutical, I guess, focused in the sense that you have a pharmacist at every dispensary. When it was first created back in the medical, and even now that Connecticut is recreational, they still require you to have a pharmacist within that dispensary, which, again, coming from California, that was very unique to me. But I think it makes, I don't know about having one at every store, if that's my suggestion, but I think it makes a lot of sense to make it more about medicine, which is really how we got the industry legalized, even though I said don't say that word, the first place. And I think states that have just focused like so hard on the recreational, while I'm for recreational cannabis, you kind of miss the mark to not focus more on the medicine and provide that guidance of how people should be using it. And it actually provides a argument against cannabis, because anything can be addictive or or I don't know about addictive, but misused, I guess would be the right word. And I think rushing into things has made, kind of murky waters, and it's better to have someone with medical knowledge on the plant and how it can interact with people's bodies, at the dispensary, or at least on staff with companies, to be able to help guide those patients. I think that's very important. That's important to us at Fine Fennel. Again, in Connecticut, it's required to have a pharmacist at the stores. And I think that's why we won one of the 6 licenses in Georgia that were highly competitive, because Georgia actually was one of the first states, or the only state, to say private pharmacies could sell cannabis. So the Georgia market was set up that cannabis was going to be sold both through dispensaries and through pharmacies. And therefore, Fine Fettle was very well versed in the pharmaceutical angle, and we were fortunate to win one of these 6 licenses. Sadly, that never materialized on the pharmacy side, because the DEA wrote a letter last year to all Georgia pharmacies basically saying, don't forget we're in charge. If you try and do that, good luck. And that scared all of them off. So,
Well, shoot. But it does kind of bring up a point that I was going to get later in the conversation, but why not dive in now, of like the importance of getting the medical professionals of Georgia kind of like on your side, both, while you're stocking your dispensaries, but also while you're doing that lobbying that's part of your job. So I guess my first question is like, when you are connecting with these doctors in Georgia, like how often do you find that they're skeptical, and how often do you find that they're already like ready for the cause, ready to fight,
yeah, well, I mean, it is paramount to my job to work with doctors and help educate them, or ideally find doctors that are far more educated than me on cannabis. To answer your question, I mean, since we're in the South here, I mean, just in general, most doctors didn't even learn about the endocannabinoid system in medical school. So there's just naturally, they know not everything, but they're so knowledgeable on medicine and they're so used to knowing, the science behind it. I think the fact that they don't know this makes them, I don't know, somewhat shy to approach the topic because they don't know and they're used to knowing things, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense.
And that's across the board. Fortunately, though, I mean, there's a lot of doctors that have gone out of their way to educate themselves. I mean, there's tons of research out there from other countries to the whole Schedule 1 versus Schedule 3. Unfortunately, part of why doctors aren't educated on cannabis is because as a Schedule 1 drug, you can't do proper clinical research on cannabis. Therefore, there's no real US research studies. But we, help educate them. I know a lot of doctors that have, you know, dedicated really their careers to learning more about it. And then we work with them to help educate those other doctors because they really need to hear, physician to physician, like, what is the science behind this?
Yes. And like to your point, I bet the more like tenured doctors in the field, the more experienced doctors, like in the grand scheme of like American research, like cannabis is still fairly new, like obviously we've been using it for millennia across the globe as medicine, but like as far as like actual studies, perhaps the more tenured doctors didn't have access to that research when they were in medical school. You know what I mean?
No, I mean, I don't blame them. Like you said, they weren't educated on it, and there's a lot of other, not that it's a minor issue, but especially let's say in Georgia, you know, it's all brand new. So I think they're doing their best to learn about it. And in terms of what we come across, I mean, ideally, we try and work with doctors that are already open and knowledgeable about it because the medical cards in Georgia have been around since 2015, which is kind of the wild part. But the operators didn't really open until 2023. So trying to find those doctors that have been recommending cannabis to the patients and saying, hey, now we're open. There's a place to go buy safe, legal cannabis in Georgia, and have that be more of the conversation. And then, yeah, kind of the secondary part is if people don't know but are open to learning, how do we educate them? We provide them with materials and, again, connect them with other doctors that can help answer their question doctor to doctor. And then there's, ones that are just not open to it, which, happy to engage in that conversation, but just due to bandwidth and all the things there are to do in the world, debating someone that doesn't want to hear about it isn't really the best use of time. So
Fair enough. Maybe cross that bridge later, later on in the future. But that being said, I would still like to return to kind of like the politics angle here. So, you've made connections with doctors, you have a medical professional backing you. I think you said in our first conversation how that is often helpful, for obvious reasons in speaking with politicians in Georgia. Can you give me a little insight on that part of your job?
yeah, I mean, the main thing we need to do right now is educate the medical professionals so that they can tell their patients, and then we need to change the laws so that we have a more sustainable program both for the patients and for the operators. I mean, in Georgia, you have to be vertically integrated, which is, I guess, an advantage in some sense. It's also very costly. You have to build out a cultivation, a manufacturing facility, because we can't sell smokable products right now. So we have to take all of our flower, turn it into oil, then turn it into our products. And then we have to build out dispensaries as well. So that's quite costly and just a, long time to build all that out.
For sure.
We only have about 25,000 patients in the program. So there's not, tons of volume at the stores yet. And we need to increase the patients. One, because there's a lot more than 25,000 people in Georgia that need this medicine, and they either just don't know about it, they don't think they qualify under one of the conditions because the conditions are limited. Although the reality is it's actually quite easier to get a card than just the misconception may be. And then we need to add the products that people want, which again is flower and vape, as I said earlier. I mean, that's not rocket science. Those are the top two SKUs anywhere. And from a medical point of view, when you smoke flower or anything outside of an IV, inhalable products is the quickest way to get medicine into your body. So if someone is, going through chemotherapy, or, I talked to someone yesterday that had Parkinson's and they have insomnia, so can't sleep. You might want to smoke and have immediate relief versus take an edible and wait an hour. In my opinion, it's kind of inhumane to not give people the medicine that has the best effect on them, and also to then, I don't know, have legislators determine what conditions warrant what medicine. Doesn't really even make sense. We should allow the doctors to do that.
Right. I mean, especially when, as you've said, like a large part of this is like educating these people who've probably been in the field for a very long time about the actual medicinal benefits of the plant. Like, if these legislators are not educated about that, it kind of makes the whole thing even more unfair. You know what I mean?
I 100% know what I mean. I didn't add, but I say that to the legislators out of love. Another connection is my dad was a longtime state senator here in Georgia. So definitely helpful to have grown up understanding the legislative process, and then also know some of the players that are helpful in terms of changing the laws. But yeah, they're not experts in cannabis, that's for sure. And I mean, they're not generally experts in any, I mean, there's healthcare law, there's all these things. These are regular people that have whatever their normal job is. So I kind of know all of this nuance and minutia of anything, let alone cannabis, which is brand new. That's unexpected. So my kind of main takeaway or ask is like, let's not try and over legislate it or over regulate it, but we've deemed that it's medicine. And Georgia, at least, and one good thing about, some of the southern, more conservative states from a business point of view is they're very business friendly in the sense of less regulations. So kind of my hope for Georgia and some of these new states turning on is once they get comfortable with cannabis, and in general they're more anti-regulation or less regulation and more business friendly, it could actually be a really great market for cannabis companies to operate in, where kind of the death nail in some of the other states has been over-regulation and over-taxation.
Yes, because it kind of comes back to like, why would a legacy business owner translate to the legal market if it's super regulated, if, we're skeptical about government involvement in cannabis, maybe, you know what I mean? And so I get that. And I was not trying to clown on your dad. So, Mr. Hill, if you're listening, so sorry. But
I'll take that one. All good.
But we've talked a lot about the future and how we'd like to see the Georgia market change. But I'd like to kind of bring it down to the day-to-day, the right now. Find Fettle from findfettle.com, if that's the website. Like, you see, one of the first things you read is that comfort is a priority, whether that's comforting some older patients who may not have been in a dispensary before, or providing comfort to a younger generation who's very familiar with it. What does that look like on the day-to-day?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you reading up on this, and a great question. Our goal is really about providing comfort in cannabis, as you said, and the simplest or highest level answer is, me and my team's existence here in Georgia, being Fine Fettle is in Connecticut and Massachusetts. What I think we really wanted to do is be local at all the markets that we serve and meet people where we're at. So that's why we have a Georgia-based team, boots on the ground, and we've hired a lot of Georgia local people that also have experience in the industry. So I think it's comforting to people to, one, have someone to talk to here on the ground, two, have that be someone that is from here, understands the culture around cannabis, and just in the fact that cannabis hasn't really been a part of the legal culture here. So I'd say that's the first part, is like being localized and having a team that is present for patients and even just people to be curious about cannabis to talk to us. And then really for, I mean, the physicians, where the patients are. Like, I was just at a veterans event earlier today for Veterans Day coming up. It's again about going out into the community and finding where the patients are and meeting them where they're at. We do a lot of work with veterans groups, you know, addiction groups. Is actually, it's become kind of, I don't know about reverse logic, but some people would think that doesn't line up with cannabis, but it's been seen as a harm reduction for a lot of people with addiction to use cannabis to get off opioids and other, you know, stronger drugs. Um, Cancer is clearly a big, um, I mean, use case for cannabis. I mean, all over the country, but here in Georgia. So we do a lot of work, I guess, in those communities. And then, as you know, really a startup here and someone that owns our whole supply chain, which is cool as a vertical operator. If you talk to a patient at the store and they say, I need this product, we can say, if enough people are asking for that, let's go make it ourselves, because we make our own products.
Yeah.
So I'd say, yeah, that's really like just trying to be letting the patients drive the conversation of what they need, and going out and finding them wherever they are in their local community.
That is beautiful. And like, I know that you have been opening doors of dispensary locations, I believe, like all summer, but have you seen an impact in the community since opening these locations?
Yes, I mean, we opened 3 dispensaries over 6 weeks this summer, so it was quite busy from mid-July to the start of September. We did that. We've got 2 stores in the Metro Atlanta area, so for anyone that's familiar, we have one in Smyrna, which is the west side of Atlanta, one in Decatur, which is the east side, and then we have one in Athens. To answer your question, Athens is where UGA is. We're the first and only dispensary there, which is pretty cool. But the feedback from the community has been so appreciative, because before that, they were having to drive an hour and a half, 2 hours one way to Atlanta and back. So that's 4 hours to get medicine. And considering that most of these people have severe conditions, like, it's pretty unbelievable that you make someone who's sick drive 4 hours. Like, oftentimes they have, you know, fixed incomes, they're elderly, limited budget. That's gas, that's the headache of driving 4 hours.
That's like
But
sitting in the seat for so long that your back hurts, you
well,
know?
yeah, I guess at the basic level, yes, like the impact in the community is with the patients just thankful to have access to the medicine, has been really rewarding and cool to see.
Yeah, and I think that those patients who might live in, I don't know if Athens is rural, but might live in more rural areas who the closest dispensary is 2 hours away. I think those patients often like fly under the radar, you know?
We're sitting, I mean, Athens is more rural than Atlanta. Like I said, it's 2 hours away, but there's a huge university there, what have you. It's not as rural as some parts of Georgia, is what I'm getting to. And that's kind of been the unfortunate part right now, where good opportunity. Georgia is a huge state. There's 11 million people, and it's, you know, biggest state on the east of the Mississippi, essentially. But yeah, there's a lot of land to cover. And when we're only so many dispensaries are open because there's only so many patients, but let's say there's that patient down in South Georgia or Middle Georgia that doesn't have any dispensary close by them, we're really trying to progress the program, get more patients in it, because every 10,000 patients, we're allowed to open another store, which is a unique thing to Georgia. If you could do things like delivery, again, the original point of the idea of having private pharmacies be able to sell that is that there's already private pharmacies in each local community. So yeah, it's really good about getting access to the patient, and that's kind of the difficult thing to true up with a business point of view, because from a business standpoint, it costs a lot of money to go build a dispensary, and there's only so many dispensaries you can build at a time. And while you want to go have one in the middle of nowhere to serve the handful of patients that are there, it's hard to be everywhere at one time with limited resources.
Hmm. So this might also be a silly question. So bear with me for a sec. If like every 10,000 patients you get to open a new dispensary, does that mean that like Fettle gets to open one, Botanical Sciences gets to open one, everybody gets to open one? Or are you kind of battling it out?
Everyone.
Okay.
No battle, I guess. It's more about equitable, to the opposite of battling it out, because I'd say the most similar market to us is Florida, where everyone is vertically integrated in Florida. And originally there was like 6 or 7 operators that slowly over the years have increased. I think there's 20 or something now. But there's 6 of us initially. We're all vertically integrated. But the difference is in Florida, there was no mechanism on the retail. So if you or anyone who's listening is familiar, I mean, in Florida, you have people like a True Leaf that has 140 stores. And then there's other groups that have, 50, 60. So that's a ton of stores. In California, like a big chain is maybe, 4 or 5 stores. Um, the Georgia mechanism, I guess, makes it more fair in terms of how we grow. So there's not just one operator that goes out and builds 100 stores and therefore they win the market. Everyone gets to add a store every 10,000 patients.
I love that, honestly. And like you bringing up Florida reminds me like at time of filming this is like election week and Florida just struck down recreational cannabis
Yeah.
again. But I know that a lot of people in the med market were kind of hesitant to see it grow into like a recreational space. You know what I mean? And so, as someone working within a more restrictive program, I'm wondering if, I mean, obviously you aren't in the heads of these Florida med market professionals, but like, can you give me some insight into maybe that point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I've done work in Florida prior to, joining Fettle and moving out to Georgia. I'd worked in a bunch of states, so I'm familiar. And I guess, I don't know, as a cannabis enthusiast, I always want more access and everywhere to progress. So yeah, it was kind of a bummer that it lost. I guess from a Georgia point of view, what it happens in reality whenever a state goes recreational is everyone at the border stores become the most popular. So I would venture to say all of South Georgia would just start driving down into Florida to buy recreational weed, which wouldn't have really helped our program.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think the medical, like what we really want to see in Georgia is not that I want recreational so much, but more of just a widespread medical program similar to Florida, where they have all the products. You can do cool brands, you can do flower, vape, concentrates. All the California brands are now coming into Florida. So you walk in the dispensary, you have options. It's relatively easy to get a cannabis card. But I think the medical aspect still keeps like the integrity of the program, where it's really about, I mean, I honestly don't personally care how severe your condition is, whether it's, something that's on a deathbed or someone that's just a normal person that uses cannabis to treat whatever it is that they need to treat. It's not for me to judge, and I don't think that's for any legislators or anyone else to judge. But personally, and I think what you're saying is the medical professionals in Florida were like, let's keep it a medical program, because what really changes? Like anyone that wants a card can get a card. We have all the products, but we still have the medical aspect where kind of the negative. I don't want to say that recreational is negative, especially when I've spent most of my time in California and what have you. But you do see just like some of this kind of race to the bottom and commoditization and frankly like making cannabis more goofy and childish, where it's been really rewarding to be in a medical market like Georgia and see the real life-changing medical benefits of cannabis. And if I had to pick between like goofy cartoon weed and healing really sick people, I would pick the healing sick people all day long.
Incredible. Love to know that there's someone with their heart in the right place in the Georgia market. But it does, you know, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this because we've been working so hard to see cannabis being taken seriously as medicine, but one of my coworkers the other day were like, what about the social aspect of it? What about just like having fun with it? And I do agree with you that, like helping people combat their symptoms is like much, much more important. But it makes me curious of like how we are going to find that balance when it is a Schedule 3 substance and so on and so forth. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a trick question. I mean, let me definitely controversial. So I have a brand of smokable products. It was one of the first way I got involved in the industry. I'm a smoker, so I will clarify and say all that. No problem with people having a cannabis beverage out socially. I think that's awesome. Smoking a joint, whatever it is. And I guess that's when I was saying, like, who am I to judge what people's reasons are? Maybe you smoke because it helps you relax or, reduce anxiety. I guess I categorize all of that, frankly, in the more, it's a far-reaching medical, and I guess that's where it crosses more into the recreational. But I just see cannabis as a net positive versus the opposite being alcohol is frankly poison for your body. Yet it's in so normalized over the course of time where alcohol is the one drug. If someone gives you alcohol and you say no, people look at you like you're weird. Well, you're just not, trying to put poison in your body at the time. And so kind of convoluting a few things, but I frankly, like, to the recreational part, I think cannabis is a social lubricant for some people and helps be creative for other people. And those can all replace different types of medications or other substances that we put in their body. And that's how I personally rectify all of that in my own head.
No, I feel you. And I did a previous conversation with Dr. Carly Bell, who is one of the men reviewers on Veriheal staff, and she said something that cannabis is medicine, period. And everyone who uses it, whether they know it or not, is using it for like even just to get high. Like, how do you feel when you're high? You feel less anxious, you feel more creative. And so those can be like medicinal benefits in a way. And so
100%. I mean, people use all types of supplements. People use Adderall to be more productive. People drink alcohol to be more social. So yeah, I mean, it's a broad use of the medical term, but like, I'm a cannabis patient for intractable pain because I got T-boned by a semi truck 14 years ago and I still have pain. So that fits the definition of intractable. I've tried, all the other traditional solutions, but I'd say anxiety is kind of a secondary reason, or more just to the social aspect where like I don't drink anymore, but I like to have a cannabis beverage now, or I'll smoke or what have you, just because I enjoyed being high and chilling when I'm out with people.
yeah, I just cut.
That's fine, and I'm cool to say that.
Sweet. Well, hell yeah. With that, before we wrap up, is there anything else you want the world to know about cannabis?
I mean, I think we touched on most of at least the key topics for me right now. It's really just about unifying. I mean, to your point, it's election week, so unifying the whole country and unifying our industry. In the case of the hemp versus cannabis, or the medical versus recreational, like we all talked about. I mean, cannabis really is about bringing people together and healing people, in my opinion. And I think that should be the number one lens that we all look through things and then go from there. And hopefully that brings everyone closer together rather than causing more division within our industry. That should be a peaceful one in the first place.
Right. Couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you for this conversation. Lovely to see you as always.
You too. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Judson, for coming on the show. I always love sitting down with Judson because not only is he working in the Georgia cannabis market right now, but clearly from this conversation, you can tell he has a lot of experience in like different facets of the cannabis industry, can answer all my silly questions, and I never really know what he's going to say next. And so thank you, Judson. Thank you for tuning in. And before I let you go, if you are interested in getting your med card, if you are wondering if you qualify in your state, Veriheal can help you get answers to all of your questions and link you with a certified cannabis practitioner in your area. To get started, visit veriheal.com. That's Veriheal. And you could make an appointment from the safety and comfort of your home right then and there. We'll see you there. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.